I am going to try, I promise you I am going to try to keep my thoughts more succinct, because I have seen comments saying I've been getting a little bit too long-winded recently in these reviews. Although I will say, if your time is really that precious to you, then this objectively possibly not the show for you to go and see. Oh my god, hey, my name is Mickey Jo and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I'm a professional theatre critic here on social media, and today I'm going to be reviewing another show I have been invited to go and see in the West End. That show is Kiss Me Kate, which has recently opened at the Barbican Centre in London. In a programming move that I will say seems to be an attempt to replicate the success that they found with Cole Porter's Anything Goes. Quite literally, they are taking another popular Cole Porter musical with a recognisable classic name, and they are combining a British TV actor with an American Broadway leading lady. Anything Goes had Robert Lindsay and Sutton Foster. Kiss Me Kate has Adrian Dunbar from TV's Line of Duty and Stephanie J. Block, Tony Award winner Stephanie J. Block. But does bringing in performers from those completely different backgrounds result in cohesive casting that has believable chemistry when you have them playing romantic leads? And more to the point, does this show work? Did we need a Kiss Me Kate revival? What is this offering musical theatre audiences? Is this the kind of a revival that does something in a very classic traditional way, or is this the kind of a revival that tries to turn the whole thing on its head and reinvent the wheel? We will find out in today's new review. Now, if you enjoyed this one, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. If that's where you're seeing this video, you can turn on notifications somewhere so YouTube lets you know whenever I'm sharing a new theatre review or a piece of theatre news or a vlog. If you're listening to this in podcast form on one of the many podcast platforms you can find me on, then hello to you. I'm wearing a nice burgundy hat because there are gangsters in this musical, and I regret it immediately. It's so warm in my flat right now, even at midnight, that I am sat here and you can't see this, even if you can see me, but my feet are in a bowl of ice water just to make this work. I just really wanted to wear this blazer, okay? But I understand that I'm ridiculous, and that's really all that matters. Now, if you've already seen Kiss Me Kate at the Barbican, I would love to know what you thought in the comments section down below. I feel like if this one ends up dividing audiences, it may have a lot to do with whether people have an appetite for traditional classic musical theatre or not. But I'll talk more about that in today's review. So, with no further ado, here are my thoughts on this new production of Kiss Me Kate. And to begin with, for those of you who have no idea what Kiss Me Kate is, let me tell you a little bit about the history of the show. So one of the first things I think we need to know about Kiss Me Kate is that it's very old, and I don't say that to be flippant, but I say it because this is a classic musical, but I think because of when it's set, it feels like it was written more recently than it was. This is a Cole Porter scored show. Like, this is pre a lot of other Broadway musicals. In fact, it premiered on Broadway in 1948, and in 1949 it won the first ever Tony Award for Best Musical. That is how old this show is. This show is as old as the Tony Awards. So if parts of it feel dated and misogynistic, and you know what, I don't know why I bothered saying if in that sentence, let me redo that. Parts of it feel dated and misogynistic, but you know, that has to be acknowledged, the age of the thing. Now, the show is often talked about and invoked in conversations about musicals based on works of Shakespeare, and it's not strictly the case here. Let me explain why this one is a little bit different to something like West Side Story, which is a musicalized version of Romeo and Juliet, right? Kiss Me Kate is about a company of performers putting on a musical based on Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. Now, their outer lives bear some parallels and similarities to the action that unfolds within the Shakespearean story, but Kiss Me Kate in and of itself is not exactly The Taming of the Shrew, not really. Principally, we follow two pairs of performers. You have Fred Graham and Lily Vanessy, who are playing Petruchio and Catherine. Fred is also directing the entire thing, and the two of them used to be married. Lily has agreed to join the company. The show is hoping to go to Broadway, and it's currently in Baltimore, which it is made clear to us throughout the show is not, in fact, Broadway. But there remains a palpable tension between the two former lovers, not aided by the fact that they are literally sparring on stage. If you don't know the plot of The Taming of the Shrew, I'll give you a super condensed version. There's this guy, he's got two daughters. He won't let the younger daughter get married to one of the many suitors who wants to marry her, and she wants to get married because he has this older daughter who is known to be a shrew. Nobody wants to marry her because of her spiteful personality until Petruchio turns up, and he's happy to marry her for financial gain, and then basically gaslights and tortures her into behaving better by training her like a dog, with some finer nuances buried in here and there. Back to Kiss Me Kate, the plot outside of the plot, and the other couple I told you about, who are Bill Calhoun and Lois Lane. Different Lois Lane. Superman is not involved on this occasion. Who play Bianca, the younger sister, and Lucentio, one of her suitors. Now, they are also a real-life couple, and this represents something of a big break for them professionally, but this doesn't stop Lucentio gambling away all of their savings, invoking the irritation of a local gangster who sends 2 henchmen to go and collect the money that Bill has foolishly signed an IOU for in the name of his employer Fred Graham, this leading to a lot of predictable confusion when the gangsters arrive at the theatre during a performance. In fact, the entire show pretty much unfolds over the course of a performance, and we are seeing backstage shenanigans and pre-performance anxieties and the interactions between the cast, and it's over one sort of tumultuous evening that the whole thing unfolds. Oh, I didn't tell you about Lois. Lois has been with a great many men for what seems like financial gain, but also perhaps sport. She seems to enjoy herself. Now, since the show's Broadway premiere in the late 40s, it has been revived extensively. It was also adapted for film in sort of the golden era of movie musicals. Several changes were made. Too Darn Hot, which was previously a company number, became a tap solo for Ann Miller. But there have been notable revivals over the last 25 years. There was a big Broadway revival in 1999, directed by Michael Blakemore, with choreography by Kathleen Marshall and Rob Ashford. That production subsequently, I believe, transferred to the West End in the early 2000s. And then around a decade later, there was another West End revival transferring in from Chichester Festival Theatre, which was the first time I had ever seen the show. That production starred Hannah Waddingham and Adam Garcia, among others, and it has been seen both in the UK and on Broadway even since then. So this is a show that comes around a fair bit, and it's also a show the wheels of which aren't particularly reinvented every time that we see it. The aesthetics, both in terms of the set design and the costuming, tend to always be quite traditional. It's not like, one of your Sondheim revivals or something like Cabaret, where it kind of metamorphosizes in something different every time it is restaged by a different director. And that's not to say you couldn't do something a lot more bold with Kiss Me Kate. I think just because it's thought of in a classic way, sort of like a Guys and Dolls or an Anything Goes, where, we always have that same kind of an aesthetic and a similar kind of a creative approach. And a big part of that, I suppose, is to let the material shine, and there is a lot of glorious material in this show. Now, the score I mentioned features music and lyrics by Cole Porter. The book for the production was written by Bella and Samuel Spewak, who, interestingly enough, are said to have been in the midst of their own marital woes during the writing process for Kiss Me Kate, and there's an enormous amount of charm and wit in the book that is also echoed in Cole Porter's lyrics. I mean, this is what Cole Porter is best remembered for. And it's the rhymes in Kiss Me Kate specifically that I think are so incredibly genius. The most obvious showcase for which is a song like Brush Up Your Shakespeare, where the punchline of almost every single line is a Shakespearean play that has been set up to rhyme with something unexpected. Example, if she says your behaviour is heinous, kick her right in the Coriolanus. See also rhyming British ambassador with Troilus and Cressida, and they're not all winners, at least in the intellectual sense, because some of them are incredibly stupid, but stupid in a way that is allowed within the context of this lyric because it's being performed by gangsters, who are 2 of the show's most charming characters. I mean, one of the lines that they sing rhymes Hamlet with Damlet, but the concept of these characters is just such a winning one, because from the beginning they arrive backstage at this show, and we have this whole very Shakespearean, actually, mistaken identity thing, where they're convinced that the person they've come to extort the money owed from is Fred Graham rather than Bill Calhoun, but it turns out that they actually have a great respect and admiration for the stage, and they end up participating in the show. They get roped into being on stage with guns to prevent Lily from leaving the production because she gets so furious with her former husband halfway through the show, and he explains to the gangsters that they're not going to get their money unless the show is a hit, so she can't be allowed to leave the building. Another of my favourite songs in the score in terms of its lyrics is Always True to You in My Fashion, that Lois sings in the second act. Again, there are so many brilliant rhyming couplets in this. Mr. Gable, I mean Clark, wants me on his boat to water park. If the gable boat means a sable coat anchors away, like genius. It's absolutely classic Cole Porter. It's delicious to listen to, but it's not just witty. You also have some of Cole Porter's loveliest soaring ballads. Wunderbar I could kind of take or leave. It's a song that Lily and Fred sing towards the beginning while they're reminiscing about the career that they had together. But something like So in Love, beautiful, stirring, and one of my favourite things, which is a very mature and serious love song. It's not the love song of a 20-year-old ingenue who's just fallen in love with an emotionally unavailable man when she's seen him for the first time at a carnival. This is the love song of somebody who's actually lived a life. No shade to Carousel, but you get what I mean. At the same time, and though I am someone who enjoys classic musicals, I do not think that Kiss Me Kate is the perfect musical. I think if we were to find a way to update it slightly more than has been done, because light adjustments have been made, but I think something a little bit more substantial, and I'm not wanting to lose the plot of the show, even I'm just wanting to reframe it slightly, which is something that this production begins to do, but with quite a light touch. Let me tell you a little bit more about this revival of the show. So this revival has been directed by Bartlett Sher, who among other work has become very well known for the Golden Age musical revival, and he's done many of them very well. His late 2000s revival of Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific at Lincoln Center I thought was stunning and one of the best stagings of the show that I have ever seen. More recently he's directed revivals of The King and I and of My Fair Lady, and a running theme through all of these is that he approaches them in a very classic way with these beautiful, grand, creative elements. It harkens back to a different era of musical theatre, to this golden age, and he gives the material space to sing. And so his productions are consistently, I feel, at their best when cast with people who know what to do with that kind of space, who can fill that space with their own acting through song talents, with their own storytelling, who can mesmerise an audience alone on stage for an extended period of time in a slower, older book musical. The likes of Kelly O'Hara understand this implicitly, and so for that matter does Stephanie J. Block, which is why the best moments of this production of Kiss Me Kate are, honestly, when she is alone on stage delivering these musical numbers. Her performance of So in Love, but even more so her performance of I Hate Men, highlight moment of the production. What's interesting though, and this is so often a criticism I have of Kiss Me Kate, is the entire highlight moment of the production is undeniably Too Darn Hot, this huge company number dance sequence that opens the second act of the show. Now it doesn't contribute whatsoever to the ongoing narrative, because at the height of the plot's tension with these gangsters on stage wielding guns and Lily as their captive and all of this drama happening, Too Darn Hot takes us away from all of that and often barely involves any of the central quartet of characters. Like Bill Calhoun dances in it in this production. He's played by Charlie Stemp and he appears as one of two featured dancers because it's predominantly led by Jack Butterworth as Paul. And it's this explosive, high energy, steamy dance sequence. The choreography is incredible, it's exciting, it is firing on all cylinders, and it brings a level of energy and enthusiasm and pulse to that stage that is absent for much of the rest of the thing, and it all starts to feel a little slower by contrast. Don't get me wrong, the second act of Kiss Me Kate is, I think, on balance, stronger than the first. It's one of the rare musicals to have a better second act. But the criticism I so often have for this show is that it seems like they reach Too Darn Hot, and because the material dictates they do something very high energy and exciting with it, because it's such a great number, because it's so well written, they do something really thrilling. But they don't then re-examine the rest of the piece and go, what if we brought that same level of energy and enthusiasm? And I'm not saying that you need huge ensemble dance numbers throughout the rest of the piece. I'm just saying that particular pulse, that particular sense of energy and of drive and that kind of electricity, if that could reverberate throughout the rest of this material, the whole thing would be much more exciting. And there is a strong opening to the thing. It's chaos and there are 50,000 people running around, and it sort of slowly builds, and we have the house lights on for a long time, and there is a half overture that gets interrupted by this opening rehearsal scene. I love the way that this production starts. From there, unfortunately, the energy level just sort of plateaus, and when we go into these scenes in the show, within the show, the whole thing dips. I do think a lot of the individual creative elements, as often seen in Bartlett Sher led productions, are stunning. Anthony Van Laast's choreography is brilliant, particularly in Too Darn Hot. In both that and the opening section, I noticed what seemed to be nods to Fosse-style choreography, and this could be tantamount either to the fact that Fosse is so, implicitly part of the language of jazz, musical theatre, dance, but it may also be a nod to the fact that Bob Fosse is kind of intertwined in the history of Kiss Me Kate in a fun way. And that's because Fosse actually appeared as a dancer in the 1953 movie musical version of the show. But not only that, he was able to choreograph a small section of a song that doesn't actually appear in this production called From This Moment On. It is evidently different to the style of the rest of the choreography. It is brief and it is contrasting and it's electric, kind of like Too Darn Hot is in this production, honestly. But those notes included, I very much enjoy Anthony Van Laast's work on this show. And with the whole thing, honestly, it's very hard to pinpoint specific faults because all of the individual elements are incredibly strong. Michael Jurgen's set design is fantastic, and the way that it's utilized, it's this huge revolving thing with 3 different sides, so we can be shown the playing space, and then it turns to show us 2 different backstage areas with dressing rooms. There's one particular sequence that's brilliant because it has movement, because it has energy, because it has vitality, where Stephanie J. Block as Lily Vanessa is thundering around backstage and moving between these different areas, and the whole thing is spinning, and that's the level of chaos and pace that Kiss Me Kate ought to have. I mean, it's a backstage comedy farce, ultimately. The likes of Noises Off subsequently did this in a funnier way. While we're talking about design, we have to talk about Catherine Zuber's costume design. They look fantastic. They are gorgeous, both the costumes within the musical they're putting on and the ones that they wear outside of that. The whole thing, just design-wise, looks beautiful. The music is also stunning. It sounds rich, it sounds full, it is largely very well sung. We're going to talk about the performances in just a moment. And every creative who has been brought onto this show has done their job exceedingly well. It just feels as though we need a little bit more inspiration in terms of the vision for the thing, because it's just a classic Kiss Me Kate. It is neither perfect enough to be considered definitive, nor groundbreaking enough to be considered new and necessary. And so that question I posed at the beginning, do we need this Kiss Me Kate? What is this Kiss Me Kate among, the many that we've seen over the last 20 years? What is this one bringing us? And I can't really tell you what the answer to that is, other than slight changes to make it a little bit less aggressively misogynistic. Let me tell you about those. So from what I can remember of having seen the show previously, and from what I can tell, there are small, very subtle things done here to curtail the way that Fred treats Lily and to give her a little bit more agency. There's also, I think one of the most egregious moments in the show is when she returns at the end, having fled with another gentleman suitor, and she comes to the realization that she does still love Fred, so she surprises him on stage even after they've had the understudy get ready to go on for her because he's, given up on the idea that she's going to stay with the show. She surprises him on stage and sings this demeaning song in the role of Catherine about how she is ashamed of womankind for not, kowtowing to the men in their lives. In this production, he begins to sing the lyrics with her as a sort of a peace offering, and you can tell from her response to that how much it means to her, and it's more of a coming together on the same level. Do you feel as though the marriage is actually going to work? No, absolutely not. You feel like they're in exactly the same place as where they started. It doesn't feel like a brilliant reconciliation where they've each learned and grown and they should remarry. It just feels like maybe they'll get through the run of the show. Maybe they'll get through Baltimore, maybe not Broadway. Now, before I tell you about the performances, I want to give you another example of where I thought we needed a little bit more inspiration, and that's in the number I told you about before, Always True to You in My Fashion, performed by Georgina Onuorah as Lois Lane. This is a song in which Bill finds out that she has been seeing numerous other men, and she defends this behaviour by explaining how lucrative it is to her. With the brilliantly witty lyrics of Cole Porter, she basically spends 4 minutes saying, "Of course I'm sleeping around, look at all the cool stuff you can get. Yes, I'm always true to you, darling, in my way." Now, this has been staged several different ways to Tuesday over the history of the show. The last time I saw it on stage, It ended with a duet section between Bill and Lois, where they were sort of challenging each other, but ultimately came back together. In this one, Charlie is on stage as Bill at the beginning, but then leaves, and for the majority of the thing, Georgina is just performing it as a solo song. And don't get me wrong, the material is strong and the lyrics are great, and there's enough to just do as a character song, like an Adelaide's Lament style of a number, but the lyrics also suggest that the whole thing is addressed consistently to Bill, and it sort of leaves her stranded on stage when she is alone for the majority of the thing, singing "I'm always true to you, darling," in my fashion. There's only so many times that she can cock her head and yell that out of the doorway through which he left 3.5 minutes ago. Like, he is no longer down the corridor, he absolutely can't hear what you're singing. It's also not a slow number, it demands a certain amount of staging. If she were to be chasing him around this theatre and the set were to be moving, if we were to be utilising some kind of dance, if she were to be dancing with like the images of several different men conjured up in her imagination, give us something, give us anything, but don't just have her stand there and at some point sit on the floor. She's doing a great job trying to deliver this material. It's just not enough on that huge Barbican stage, not deep into the second act of the show. But those are my thoughts about this creative approach to the show. Ultimately, it centres these performances, so let me tell you about those, because there's plenty to say. So even though she doesn't get entrance applause at the beginning because British audiences clearly don't have enough taste, she does get the last bow at the end of the show, and I'm going to talk about her first. I am talking about Tony Award-winning leading lady Stephanie J. Block, who is sublimely well cast as Lily Vanessy in this production. It combines all of the things that she can do very well. She has this classic edge to her voice, and she gets to use sort of a duality of her voice as well, because she has an a historically underutilized soprano register. She's spent most of her career belting on Broadway, but she has a lovely soprano placement, so we hear her doing that as Lily, but as Lily as Catherine, we hear her doing more of her belting. And the other thing about Stephanie, as well as being so poised and so regal and so glamorous, is that she's really funny. She has always been incredibly funny with this brilliant dry sense of humour, and that works very well in this show. I got to go to a rehearsal preview event for this where they just showed us the opening number when she doesn't even really have any lines, but there is a moment where they are staging the bows for the show within the show, and her ex-husband Fred asks her if she's planning to smile during this, and she is visibly enraged and slaps him across the face. And in the rehearsal, she was doing this brilliant comedy bit where she would slap him and then suddenly have a full smile and be like, "Oh, look what happened. That made me so happy because I slapped you in the face." And she didn't do that by the time I saw the show on press night, but there is a line in the show where she sort of mentions the same thing about that having brought her joy. So I guess that would kind of precede that and kind of take away from the material, but I still thought it was a great moment and I kind of wish she brought it back. And there are fantastic choices like that she is making throughout this production. Her facial expressions are to die for, but it's those acting through song musical performances that are where she really shines. I Hate Men is one of the fantastic moments of this production. She has the audience exactly where she wants them and wins everyone over, I think, by the end of the thing. People enter that auditorium wondering if Adrian Dunbar is going to be any good at musical theatre, and they leave the auditorium barely caring because how great was Stephanie J. Block. She is one of the two really glistening stars of this production, and let me tell you who the other one is, because it may not be who you're expecting. I need to tell you what a star turn this is from Jack Butterworth in what limited material he has. But it is him who begins and leads Too Darn Hot at the top of the second act. He is such a fantastic dancer. He's been in the ensemble of Hamilton previously. He was in Guys and Dolls at the Bridge Theatre in the ensemble and understudying Sky Masterson. And I'm glad he's getting this opportunity to really lead with his dance talent. I think he's a star. He is fantastic in that sequence and in this show. And honestly, whenever the main narrative of the thing gets particularly fatiguing, I just find myself longing for the show to spend more time being about Paul and Hattie, who is played by Josie Benson, who has a fantastic, robust, brilliant classical voice. We get to hear her singing part of Another Open in Another Show. I wish there was more of a focus vocally on her during this, but she begins it and then she does a little bit at the end and it passes between several different people and the focus moves all over the place because we have chaos, and I don't know, I wish she was just a little bit more central and grounded with chaos happening around her and all of this, and it gave her more of a spotlight. But we do also have to talk about Adrian Dunbar. Now, prior to getting to the show, I had heard that his vocals were not great. I actually thought they were serviceable. I thought they really work as well as they need to in this. And unless you have listened to previous cast recordings, unless you know the show and you know what it sounds like when, like, Brian Stokes Mitchell, for example, sings this music, then I think you are unlikely to have much of a problem with Adrian Dunbar's vocals. And there's only really one number where he is alone singing this classical song on the stage. It's The Life That Late I Led, where it really shows that up. It's not helped that once again he's just given the space to just play the scene and just sing the song with nothing else happening. And as we've seen before, for non-musical theatre trained actors, the issue is not always just the vocals, it's also that the acting through song and the storytelling is not necessarily there comfortably. I did enjoy his characterization, however. I thought he entered very confidently at the beginning. The comedy he's got a fantastic grasp on. Do I think he does enough to make the character likeable? That's a big no for me. And in much of the second act, Peter Davidson arrives, who is playing this military guy that Stephanie J. Block's character has been being courted by, and she's going to leave with him, and Adrian Dunbar is like poking fun at him. It's giving that Mrs. Doubtfire paradigm between these two jealous men, but you don't necessarily get the sense that Adrian's character, Fred, understands her much more or is going to treat her any better. Like, for her to come back at the end, it doesn't feel like we're willing her to, or that we think this is necessarily a better choice for her to be making, because they just seem like the same man in different fonts, and not even in different fonts. I stole that line from my friend Amy after discussing this with her after the show, but they're not even different fonts. Like, this is the same man in the same font. They are so incredibly similar that it feels like whatever choice she's making in this situation, it's not going to be a great one. Like, just get out of there and go and, like, just go eat, pray, love yourself, because whatever's happening here is not working for you, Lily Vanessa, Stephanie J. Block, Catherine, and Kiss Me Kate. But like I said, it is a confident performance he's giving on stage. He is funny. He is carrying the weight of a lot of it as this classic musical comedy leading man, and he does a far better job than I had feared that he might do, given not much musical theatre experience prior to this, and alongside Stephanie J. Block. Like, she still shines considerably brighter on stage, but that's not unexpected. Then we have Charlie and Georgina as Bill and Lois, and they both individually do fantastic work. Charlie is getting to show you all of that brilliant dancing. It's a very similar characterization to the character that he played in Crazy For You, but with far less material. Georgina gets to do that vocal thing that she did in The Wizard of Oz, where it's this slightly Judy Garland-esque, very classic quality to her voice. She has an incredible instrument that can give you various different tones and timbres, and I just love when she sings classic material. I think it sounds gorgeous. She's also very funny and very playful in this production. I do think the flirtatiousness could be dialed up a little bit more, and I think if we were to have more fun with her character, then it would make it a more charming subplot every time that we cut to them. And thinking of something like A Noise Is Off, I don't see why Lois Lane as Bianca has to necessarily be a particularly good actress, because from the beginning, from our first introduction to her, it's clear that she is flirting with Fred and that he is incredibly taken with her romantically, and that this is kind of her modus operandus, and this is how she navigates in the world, by using her guile. So it would arguably make more sense for her to not be a fantastic actress by the time we get into the thing, and the numbers within the show can still be satisfying, because she can be a talented singer and dancer, but whether it would be funnier if she was a slightly more wooden actress, I don't know, just a thought. Not to skip over Peter Davison, I actually thought he did a very good job here, and I've seen him in a handful of theatrical roles, and this was really well suited to him, I thought, and he was very funny. But there are final two scene-stealing members of the cast that we have to mention, the gangster characters I told you about earlier. They are a brilliant comedy double act, they complement each other very well, and they are played by Hamed Animachon and Nigel Lindsay. Both of them supremely talented actors with varied careers up to now, but what they both understand is how to deliver comedy and charm on stage, and that's what these characters are. They are lovable gangsters. They are gangsters who long to be in this Shakespearean musical. They are gangsters who have strong opinions about the creative process, for crying out loud. Like, if I was to be a 1940s gangster, this is the 1940s gangster I would be. And essentially every single moment that we encounter them on stage throughout the show is a winning one. They do fantastic work. Every opportunity they have, it's pretty glorious casting, because they're both big deals within the theatrical world. I think they're both fantastic talents. To get them in these roles is something of a coup, and a smart piece of casting as well, because they've both done comedy on stage before, but kind of in very different tones and styles. Combining the two of them together is not something I ever would have thought of, but it works really well. The only thing I think could be stronger is a creative choice that is made on their behalf. So when they are performing Brush Up Your Shakespeare, what is set up to possibly be this show-stopping moment of the second act where they find themselves accidentally on stage in the show within a show, and they sing this song invoking all of these different titles of Shakespearean plays, talking about how, like, if you learn Shakespeare, then the women will like you better. It does the sit down, you're rocking the boat thing of ending, and then the audience applauds, and they're like, here's another verse. And it just does it too many times, because sit down, you're rocking the boat does the rule of three very well, where it's like, let's repeat it, let's repeat it, let's repeat it. And this just has too many repeats. And I think the first time we hear it, it's just too short, and clearly there is going to be more. I think we need a more substantial amount of the song, then we get a little reprise of it, then we get a little reprise of it, and then they're done. And I think it would be funnier and more satisfying to do it that way. But those have been my thoughts about Kiss Me Kate at the Barbican. Very briefly, if you're wondering if I would recommend this show to you or not, I think people who like classic musical comedy, and if you already know the show, it's a very classic version of it. If you desperately want to see Stephanie J. Block, she is not going to disappoint you. The whole thing is pretty gloriously cast in terms of the talent that they have in these smaller roles. If you don't know this already, and if you don't have much of an appetite for classic, slower paced, slightly outdated musical comedy, then this is not likely to be the show for you, and you might prefer something like a Guys and Dolls that takes classic musical comedy but infuses it with a modern energy, which is not something that this really does. Of course, if you have already seen the show, like I said, let me know what you thought of it in the comments section down below, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, then make sure to follow me on the podcast platform where you are hearing it. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!